100 lives, 100 endings, each one absurd, divine, poetic, cruel. From emperors to chemists, from poets to fools, they all met the same quiet punchline. It's never about how we die. It's about what we believed in while doing it. Some chased beauty until it caught them. Some proved their theories a little too perfectly. Some simply missed the fine print in gravity's contract. But together, they tell one truth. Death isn't the opposite of life. It's the final metaphor, the last performance in the oldest story. The lights dim, the curtain falls, and somewhere, just beyond silence, a slow, cosmic laugh begins again. Francis Bacon, the man who tried to bottle death. He believed he could preserve life in a bottle. Francis Bacon, philosopher, scientist, visionary, a man obsessed with the border between warmth and decay. It was April 1626. London was wrapped in snow, a rare white silence. Bacon sat inside his carriage, watching flakes fall on the glass. Suddenly, a thought arrived, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Could cold stop death itself? He ordered the coach to halt. They were near Highgate Hill, a small village, a farmhouse. He purchased a chicken from a startled woman, stepped into the blizzard, and began the experiment himself. He slit the bird open and packed it with handfuls of snow. His fingers burned, then numbed. His breath turned to mist. But the chicken, it froze beautifully. Within days, Bacon collapsed. Pneumonia, the quiet revenge of the cold he worshipped. He died before finishing his notes. The chicken, according to the servant, survived the night. And so one of humanity's greatest minds became the first victim of cryogenics, 4 centuries too early. They say ideas never die, but sometimes the body that carries them does. And in a way, that's the proof. Carl Scheele, the chemist who tasted death, he discovered oxygen, chlorine, and the way light itself could split water. But Carl Scheele had a fatal habit. He tasted everything he made. If it didn't kill him immediately, he wrote down the flavor. His workshop was small and silent, filled with bottles that hissed and smoked. To him, science was a conversation, and poison was simply another dialect. Mercury nitrate, bitter, metallic, hydrogen fluoride, sour and sharp, cyanide, almond, faintly sweet. He wrote that last one in his notes, the day before he died. They found him at his desk, slumped over his journal, a faint smile on his lips. He had finally learned the taste of death itself. Some say he was careless, others that he was fearless. But maybe he simply couldn't resist curiosity, the deadliest flavor of all. Horace Lawson Hunley, the inventor, swallowed by his own submarine. In 1863, during the American Civil War, a man named Horace Hunley wanted to change the sea. He built a machine no one had ever dared to build, a hand-cranked submarine. It could move silently beneath the surface and strike unseen. But there was one problem. No one had ever survived inside it for long. On a calm October day, Hunley decided to prove his invention worked. He climbed inside with 7 men, closed the hatch, and gave the signal to dive. Witnesses saw the vessel slip beneath the surface and never rise again. When divers opened it days later, they found the men seated at their stations, hands still gripping the cranks, as if waiting for a command that would never come. The submarine was raised, repaired, and eventually used again. This time, it sank an enemy ship, and itself forever. They named it the H.L. Hunley, a success by the cruelest definition. Invention, like faith, often requires sacrifice, and sometimes it takes the inventor first. Thomas Andrews, the man who designed his own tomb. He was proud of his creation, a marvel of steel and precision, the largest ship the world had ever seen, the RMS Titanic. Thomas Andrews walked her decks on that cold April night in 1912, adjusting fittings, checking details, speaking softly to the crew. When the ship struck ice, he stayed calm. He inspected the damage, knew immediately the truth. The ship would not survive. He didn't rush for the lifeboats. He didn't send telegrams. He returned to the first-class smoking room. There, witnesses say, he stood before a painting, The Approach to the New World, and quietly tore the pages from his notebook. When the lights went out, Andrews was last seen standing by that painting. His design had become his tomb, his masterpiece, his mausoleum. He built perfection, but perfection, like pride, doesn't float. Otto Lilienthal, the man who taught humanity to fall gracefully. He was called the Flying Man. Before the Wright brothers, before engines and metal wings, Otto Lilienthal leapt from hillsides armed only with canvas, wood, and faith. He believed that flight was not a dream. It was a discipline. Every day he climbed the same hill outside Berlin, his glider strapped to his back like an angel's burden. Villagers would gather to watch him run into the wind. He flew hundreds of times. He studied birds, measured air currents, even built his own wind tunnel. He wasn't reckless, he was meticulous. But flight, like fire, does not forgive small mistakes. On August 9th, 1896, his glider stalled mid-air. Witnesses saw him twist, fight for balance, then fall 50 feet to the ground. His spine shattered. He lived long enough to whisper to his brother, "Sacrifices must be made." And with that, the man who dreamed of conquering gravity became the first to be conquered by it. He didn't die for failure. He died for the possibility of success. And because of that, we fly still. Marie Curie, the woman who glowed in the dark. She found light where no one had ever looked, inside decay. Marie Curie carried small vials of radium in her pockets, amazed by how they glowed faintly blue at night. To her, it was beauty, a soft light born from invisible energy. She kept samples beside her bed, sometimes woke just to watch them shimmer in the dark. No one yet knew that this light was death disguised as wonder. Her notebooks are still radioactive today. So are her clothes, her pens, even her cookbook. Years later, her hands trembled, her bones weakened, her blood turned against her. But she never blamed the work. When asked if she regretted her research, she smiled faintly and said, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood." She discovered radiation, and it consumed her. But through her, the dark began to glow. Sylvester H. Roper, the steam man's last ride. He built the first American motorcycle, a roaring metal steed powered by steam. A craftsman, inventor, and showman, Sylvester Roper spent his days pushing the limits of speed. One summer morning in 1896, he rode his newest prototype through the streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Spectators lined the road. He smiled, nodded, and twisted the throttle. The machine screamed forward, reaching 40 miles per hour, a terrifying speed for a time when horses still ruled the roads. Then suddenly the roar stopped. The bike veered, slowed, and toppled gently into the dirt. When they reached him, Roper was still upright, hands frozen on the handlebars, a small smile on his face. The autopsy said it was a heart attack. Some believe he died in that moment of pure exhilaration, the human body unable to contain the future it had just invented. He didn't crash. He crossed over, from horsepower to human spirit. William Bullock, the press that crushed its creator. He gave the world a faster voice, and it silenced him. William Bullock revolutionized printing. His rotary press could print thousands of pages per hour. News could finally travel as fast as rumor. But the machine was a beast, a symphony of iron, gears, and motion. One day in 1867, while adjusting a belt, Bullock's leg was caught between the rollers. The machine bit down, fast, mechanical, merciless. They amputated, but infection spread. Within days, he was dead, killed by the machine he'd built to spread human thought. The newspapers he helped create printed his obituary on his own invention, a man literally written into his own ending. He made words immortal and became one himself. Molière, the playwright who died laughing. He wrote about hypocrisy. He mocked the rich, the vain, the doctors, and, unknowingly, himself. In February 1673, Molière premiered his new comedy, Le Malade Imaginaire, the Imaginary Invalid, a satire about a man obsessed with his own health. Irony sharpened its knife. During the fourth act, Molière's face turned pale. He coughed. The audience laughed, thinking it part of the act. He staggered, struggled to finish his lines, collapsed on stage. The curtain fell. The applause rose. When the audience left, they found him backstage, gasping through a mouthful of blood. He died still wearing his bright yellow costume, the color of fools. In 17th century France, actors were denied burial in consecrated ground. Only the king's order allowed him a grave. He spent his life pretending to die on stage, and died proving how convincing he could be. Dick Shawn, the comedian who collapsed mid-punchline. He made a career of absurdity, a man who could turn silence into laughter and chaos into rhythm. In 1987, during a live show in San Diego, he began an improvised bit about the end of the world. "Imagine," he said, "that we're the survivors." Then he fell, face down, still. The audience laughed. Minutes passed. They thought it was performance art, his strange genius at work. Even when crew members checked his pulse, the crowd applauded. He was dead before the laughter stopped. It took nearly 10 minutes for anyone to understand that the joke had ended, and so had he. Some actors die for applause. He died inside it. Leslie Harvey, the guitarist who kissed the current. It was May 1972 in Swansea, Wales. Leslie Harvey, guitarist of Stone the Crows, was tuning up before the concert. Rain had leaked through the roof onto the stage. His hands were wet. He grabbed the microphone. The crowd heard a single note, a sharp, unnatural hum, then silence. He was electrocuted instantly. His bandmates froze, and for a few seconds, the audience still thought it was part of the show. The current passed through him like applause turned lethal. His fingers burned into the strings. When the lights finally went out, the last thing anyone saw was his silhouette, frozen in performance. Music, after all, is only organized electricity, and sometimes it wants its charge back. Edith Webster. The Final Note. Baltimore, 1986. A small community theater. The play, The Drunkard. Edith Webster, 60 years old, a veteran of local performances, was singing her solo, "Please Don't Talk About Me When I'm Gone." She reached the final line, clutched her chest, and fell backward. The audience rose in ovation. The scene was written that way. They didn't know it wasn't acting until someone screamed backstage. She died exactly where the script said she would. On cue. They say art imitates life, but sometimes life rehearses for death. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, the monarch who died from dessert. He ruled Sweden in the 18th century, a man more fond of eating than of ruling. On February 12, 1771, he decided to indulge, a royal feast, for no reason other than the joy of being king. He ate lobster, then caviar, then sauerkraut, smoked herring, champagne, and finally his favorite dessert, semla buns filled with hot milk and almond paste. 1 bun, then 2, then 10. Accounts differ on the final number, somewhere between 14 and 16. By evening, his stomach rebelled. He fell into agony, clutching his chest, groaning for more air. Within hours, the King of Sweden was dead, killed by gluttony and almond cream. The official record still calls it a fatal indigestion. Swedes remember him as the king who ate himself to death. Not every crown is made of gold. Some are made of pastry. King James II of Scotland, the cannon that loved its king too much. It was 1460, and King James II was showing off his new toy, a massive bronze cannon called the Lion. He wanted to impress his army, to prove that even metal obeyed him. They rolled it into place before Roxburgh Castle. The king stood close, too close, as the fuse was lit. The shot thundered, and the cannon exploded. Shards of bronze tore through the air, one striking him squarely in the thigh, severing the artery. He bled out within minutes, his men too stunned to move. His wife was crowned queen the same night. The cannon was melted down, but legend says its metal still carried his blood, forged into bells that never rang quite right again. Even kings forget. When you command fire, it sometimes salutes back. Attila the Hun, the warrior conquered by a nosebleed. He was the scourge of God, a man who burned cities, crushed empires, and left entire nations whispering his name in terror. In 453 AD, on the night of his wedding to a young bride named Ildiko, he drank, laughed, and finally went to bed, a conqueror at peace. By morning, he was dead. No wound, no poison, no enemy, just blood, everywhere. He had suffered a massive nosebleed in his sleep, choking silently on his own victory. His army mourned in secret, burying him in 3 coffins, one of gold, one of silver, and one of iron. Those who dug the grave were executed to keep the location hidden forever. The man who ruled half the world was killed by a trickle of red. Power can crush nations, but not mortality. Emperor Valentinian was the man who died of his own anger. In 375 AD, the Roman Emperor Valentinian faced a delegation of barbarian envoys. They mocked him, questioned his authority, and something inside him snapped. He rose from his throne, shouting, veins swelling in his neck, spittle flying across the hall. Witnesses say his fury was like a storm, uncontrollable. Then, mid-sentence, he clutched his chest. His face froze in rage. He collapsed and died on the marble floor. The envoys were so terrified, they fled without waiting for dismissal. Rome had lost its emperor, not to war, not to conspiracy, but to a temper. He conquered nations, but never learned to conquer himself. Aeschylus, the philosopher, killed by a falling turtle. He was one of the great playwrights of ancient Greece. Aeschylus, the father of tragedy. He wrote of gods and fate, of hubris and divine punishment. In 456 BC, he was walking near Gela, Sicily, when an eagle soared overhead, carrying a turtle in its claws. The bird was hunting, and eagles, in their cunning, often drop tortoises from great heights to crack their shells on stone. Only this time, the eagle mistook Aeschylus's bald head for a rock. The turtle fell. The philosopher dropped. The gods, perhaps, applauded. It was written later that fate had spared him from dying in battle, only to kill him with an idea too absurd for fiction. He invented tragedy. Fate wrote the punchline. Sigurd the Mighty, the earl who died from his enemy's tooth. In the 9th century, Sigurd the Mighty ruled the Orkney Islands, a Viking earl feared for his brutality. After a bloody battle, he decapitated his rival, Mael Bricht, and tied the head to his saddle as a trophy. He rode home, triumphant, unaware that one of the dead man's teeth was scraping against his leg. By nightfall, the wound festered. By morning, he was dead, killed by the tooth of the man he'd already defeated. The sagas say nothing of remorse, only irony. Victory, it seems, bites back. Clement Vallandigham, the lawyer who proved his case too well. He was defending a murder suspect in 1871. The case, a man accused of shooting another during a scuffle. Vallandigham, confident in his theory, decided to demonstrate that the victim had accidentally shot himself. He picked up a pistol, identical to the murder weapon, to show the court how it could have happened. He didn't realize it was loaded. As he leaned forward to mimic the fall, the gun discharged. The bullet pierced his chest. He fell, whispering, "I have proved my case." He died the next morning. The jury, moved by the demonstration, acquitted his client. Justice was served, just not to the right man. Alexander of Greece, the king killed by a monkey. It was 1920, and King Alexander of Greece was walking in the royal gardens when his dog was attacked by a pet monkey. He rushed to intervene, as any loyal master would. The monkey bit his hand, then another monkey joined in, clawing and gnawing. The wounds seemed minor, but infections spread. Within 3 weeks, the king was dead, not from war, not from betrayal, but from a garden scuffle between pets. The monarchy collapsed soon after. Greece would spend decades in turmoil, all because of a monkey bite. History often turns on tiny teeth. Franz Reichelt, the tailor who trusted his parachute. He was known in Paris as the Flying Tailor, an inventor, dreamer, and amateur daredevil. His vision was simple: to design a parachute suit that could save pilots in distress. For months, he tested fabrics, measured drag, adjusted folds. He even used dummies. But on February 4th, 1912, he decided to test it himself from the top of the Eiffel Tower. Crowds gathered below. Journalists set up cameras. He stepped to the edge, smiling nervously, his suit flapping like wings. "Samashara," he said. "It will work." It didn't. He fell 187 feet. The suit collapsed around him like a shroud. The crowd gasped. The cameras kept rolling. He was dead before he hit the ground. He wanted to prove that man could fly, and he did, for exactly 4 seconds. Thomas Midgley Jr., the man strangled by his own invention. He gave the world leaded gasoline, and later, Freon, poisons disguised as progress. But fate was patient. By 1944, he was paralyzed from polio, yet still restless, so he built a device of pulleys and ropes to help him rise from bed without assistance. One morning, the invention malfunctioned. A loop tightened around his neck. He was found tangled in his own machinery, strangled by the very ingenuity that had once made him famous. He had polluted the planet and then, inadvertently, cleaned up his own presence from it. His final invention worked too well. Marie Curie's legacy, the glow that wouldn't fade. Not all inventors die in the instant of discovery. Some fade slowly, radiating brilliance and decay. Years after Marie Curie's death, her papers still shimmer faintly under ultraviolet light. Archivists who handle them wear gloves and dosimeters. Even now, her handwriting is dangerous. The notebooks are stored in lead-lined boxes, the ink forever whispering. Science remembers her as the mother of radioactivity, but in the quiet of the archives, she is still glowing, still alive in the most literal, lethal sense. She sought light in darkness, and the darkness answered. Henry Smolinski, the car that tried to fly. It was 1973, and Henry Smolinski wanted to merge sky and road. He attached airplane wings to a Ford Pinto, a flying car, decades before its time. The test flight began perfectly. The vehicle lifted, soared 100 feet into the air, then started to shudder. A wing detached. The Pinto spun violently, and the dream fell with it. The crash killed both Smolinski and his co-pilot instantly. The wreckage, a symbol of both genius and absurdity, lay scattered like feathers and steel. Reporters later called it a bold failure. He reached for the future and found gravity waiting. Isadora Duncan, the dancer strangled by her own freedom. She danced like the wind, barefoot, wild, the spirit of modern art in motion. Isadora Duncan refused constraint. In life, in love, in costume. On September 14th, 1927, in Nice, France, she climbed into a convertible for a drive along the sea. Around her neck fluttered a long scarlet silk scarf, a gift from a young lover. As the car began to move, The scarf caught in the wheel's open spokes. It tightened, instantly, violently. The fabric snapped her neck, jerking her out of the seat. Witnesses said the movement looked like a dance, a spin, a twist, a final bow. The scarf, her symbol of freedom, had turned executioner. She lived by movement. She died mid-gesture. Hans Steininger, the man killed by his beard. He was a 16th-century burgomaster of Braunau, Austria, and proud of one thing above all, his magnificent beard, 4.5 feet long. During a city fire in 1567, panic spread. Steininger rushed into the streets to lead his people, but in his haste, he forgot to roll up his beard, as he usually did, folding it neatly into his pocket. He stepped on it, stumbled, and fell down a stone staircase, breaking his neck. His beard survived, preserved to this day in a glass case at the local museum, a relic of vanity, loyalty, and one moment's forgetfulness. Pride often outlives the man. The lovers of Pompeii buried mid-embrace. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, ash fell like snow over Pompeii. People fled, hid, prayed, and froze in time. Archaeologists found them centuries later. Bodies turned to stone by volcanic ash, faces hidden in the dust of eternity. Among them were two lovers, their skeletons locked in an embrace, their last moment a kiss against the coming fire. Even death paused to watch them. They remained together still, bones woven like vines, the silence between them louder than the volcano that took them. Love does not survive time. It teaches it to stop. Tennessee Williams, the writer who choked on his imagination. He wrote of desire, madness, and the fragile beauty of human longing. Tennessee Williams, author of A Streetcar Named Desire. In 1983, alone in his New York hotel room, he reached for eye drops, small glass vial, metal cap. He held it between his teeth while searching his bag. It slipped, lodged in his throat. He choked. No audience, no applause, just the cruel mechanics of chance. A man who wrote deaths so poetic deserved a better editor. Desire, in the end, is just another word for gravity. Chrysippus, the philosopher who died laughing at a donkey. He was a Stoic, a man who preached control over emotion. But even philosophers have bad punchlines. Around 206 BC, Chrysippus, one of ancient Greece's most brilliant thinkers, watched his donkey nibbling on some figs. With a straight face, he told his servant, "Give the donkey some wine to wash them down." When the servant obeyed, the donkey began to stagger drunkenly around the courtyard, and the sight broke the philosopher. He laughed until his lungs refused to work. He collapsed and died, still grinning. Centuries later, his students said it was the most stoic death imaginable. He left the world not in pain, but in perfect amusement at its madness. Even logic can't outlive laughter. Basil Brown, the man who drank himself to death on carrots. He was a health enthusiast, a believer in the cleansing power of vegetables. In 1974, Basil Brown began drinking carrot juice, a lot of carrot juice, about 1.5 gallons a day. Within 10 days, his skin had turned a bright orange hue. His liver, overwhelmed by vitamin A toxicity, failed completely. Doctors said he had consumed enough carrots to kill a horse and, ironically, enough to be mistaken for one. He died glowing like a sunset, a man undone by the very thing he believed would save him. He didn't just eat healthy, he became it. Alan Pinkerton, the detective defeated by his own bite. He was America's first great detective, founder of the Pinkerton Agency, the man who foiled assassination plots and hunted outlaws. But in 1884, fate found the one clue he didn't expect: a pavement curb. While walking down the street, Pinkerton tripped, bit his tongue badly, and ignoring the wound, kept working. The cut became infected. Days later, sepsis spread through his body. The detective who'd survived gunfights and revolutions was killed by his own mouth. Even as he died, he reportedly muttered instructions for his agents, his final case unsolved. The world's greatest detective was outsmarted by bacteria. Jerome Irving Rodale, the health guru who died on live TV. He was the pioneer of the organic food movement, the prophet of longevity. In 1971, Jerome Rodale appeared on the Dick Cavett Show, declaring that he would live to be 100 unless I'm run down by some fool. Moments later, during the taping, he slumped in his chair and stopped breathing. At first, the audience laughed. They thought it was part of the banter. Cavett himself made a joke before realizing the silence was real. The man who preached eternal vitality had died mid-promise, his words still echoing in the studio lights. The episode never aired. He mastered the art of staying alive until the world called his bluff. The duplicated deaths of the twin brothers from Finland. It was March 2002, a quiet winter morning in rural Finland. A 70-year-old man set off on his bicycle down Highway 8, the same road he had traveled all his life. But this time, a truck struck him. He died instantly. 2 hours later, barely a mile away, another cyclist, also 70, was hit and killed by another truck. Police arrived, and as they checked the IDs, they froze. Same last name, same birth date. Twin brothers, two lives beginning together and ending the same way, on the same day, on the same stretch of road. The odds were astronomical, the kind of math only destiny can do. Sometimes fate doesn't repeat itself. It rehearses. James Dean, the car that predicted its own death. He called it Little Bastard, a silver Porsche Spider, sleek and rebellious, custom engraved with the nickname by the studio mechanic. Before James Dean ever took it on the road, fellow actor Alec Guinness warned him, "If you get in that car, you'll be dead within a week." He laughed. 7 days later, September 30th, 1955, he was driving to a race in Salinas, California. A Ford coupe turned unexpectedly across his lane. Dean's car hit it head-on at 85 mph. He died instantly. The wreck was later sold for parts. Every vehicle that used them also met disaster: fires, crashes, inexplicable breakdowns. It was as if the car carried his unfinished story inside its frame. The machine didn't kill him. It finished what prophecy started. Jean-Marie du Barry, the noble who died where he killed. During the French Revolution, the guillotine was an industry. Executioners worked with precision, and one of the best was a man named Jean-Marie du Barry. He prided himself on his efficiency. He even joked that one day he might feel what his clients felt. When the tides of power turned, he got his wish. In 1794, du Barry himself was condemned. The executioner who replaced him was an apprentice he had personally trained. He died under the same blade he had sharpened for years. The revolution always eats its teachers. The street that killed twice and waited 88 years to do it. In 1896, in London, a woman named Bridget Driscoll became the first pedestrian ever killed by a motor car. The driver was reportedly moving at a speed of just 4 miles per hour, a pace, witnesses said, faster than one should expect from a horse. The incident made history. 88 years later, in 1984, another Londoner, also named Bridget Driscoll, was struck and killed by a car on the very same street. Different century, same name, same place, same end. Some stories are written so neatly that even time hesitates to edit them. History doesn't always repeat. Sometimes it just remembers. Dick Shawn, the comedian who died mid-joke. April 1987, San Diego. Comedian Dick Shawn, famous for The Producers and his absurd humor, was performing a live show about the end of the world. At one point, he collapsed on stage, sprawled face down, silent. The audience laughed. They thought it was part of the act. Minutes passed. People began to applaud his commitment to the bit. Only when the stage crew rushed out did they realize he wasn't acting. A heart attack had claimed him mid-performance. The lights dimmed, but the applause continued for a moment, as if laughter itself refused to stop. He died the way all comedians dream to, in front of a laughing crowd. Owen Hart, the wrestler who fell from the sky. Kansas City, 1999. The arena was roaring with excitement. Owen Hart, beloved wrestler, was set to make a dramatic entrance. Descending from the ceiling on a harness like a comic book hero. But the harness failed. He fell 78 feet, landing in the ring in front of thousands of fans. The cameras cut away instantly. The announcer's voice trembled, then broke. The audience thought it was part of the show until they saw the referees waving for help. Wrestling is theater with blood. That night, it forgot the line between fiction and truth. He entered the ring like an angel and left it the same way. Molière, the playwright who died playing death itself. In 1673, Parisian theatre was sacred, and no one knew that better than Molière, the man who made laughter respectable. That night, he performed in his own play, The Imaginary Invalid, a satire about hypochondria. He wore yellow, the color he believed warded off misfortune. Mid-performance, he began to cough violently. Blood stained his costume, but he waved the concern away, staying in character, still making the audience laugh. He finished the act, then collapsed backstage. He died hours later, still in costume. For years afterward, actors whispered, "Never wear yellow on stage." He mocked death, and death gave him a standing ovation. King Henry of England, death by eel feast. It was the winter of 1135. King Henry of England had survived wars, rebellions, and betrayals, but not dinner. His doctors had long warned him to avoid his favorite dish, lampreys, Slippery, eel-like fish, rich, oily, and beloved by medieval nobility, they were considered a delicacy of strength and virility. One night in Normandy, Henry ignored their warnings. He demanded a full feast of lampreys, as a true king should eat. The servants obliged. He ate until his body refused to cooperate. That night, he fell ill. Violently, terribly. Fever consumed him. His stomach turned traitor, and within days, he was dead. Chroniclers recorded it simply. The good king was killed by his lampreys. The irony was too perfect. A man who ruled over knights and castles, undone by a plate of fish. Even his tomb inscription carried the faint smell of mockery, as if history itself had smirked while writing it. He conquered lands, but dinner conquered him. Otto Lilienthal, the flying man who fell from heaven. Before the Wright brothers, before powered flight, there was Otto Lilienthal, the German engineer who believed mankind was meant to soar. He studied storks, designed wings by hand, and built gliders of wood and cloth. Each flight was a step toward the impossible, and each step risked his life. He made over 2,000 successful flights. But on August 9th, 1896, while testing a new design, his glider stalled in mid-air. Witnesses saw him struggle to regain control, then plummet from 50 feet. His spine snapped on impact. He survived long enough to whisper to his brother, "Opfer müssen gebracht werden." Sacrifices must be made. His notes inspired the Wrights, who later called him the true father of flight. He gave humanity wings and paid with the fall. He didn't crash. He completed the experiment. Karel Soucek, the stuntman who defied Niagara, once too often. In 1984, Karel Soucek, a Canadian stuntman, decided to conquer Niagara Falls. Sealed inside a custom-made red barrel, lined with padding and air tanks, he survived the plunge, bruised but alive, and became a celebrity overnight. But fame is a hunger that grows. A year later, he tried again, this time at the Houston Astrodome, dropping 180 feet into a water tank before a live audience. The barrel was supposed to hit dead center. It didn't. It struck the rim of the tank with a sickening crack. The crowd gasped, then fell silent. Soucek was pulled out alive, but dying. He whispered, "It's worth it," then closed his eyes. Niagara forgave him once. Gravity never does twice. He lived by the fall and died by the encore. Henry Winstanley, the lighthouse keeper who challenged the sea. In the late 1600s, England's Eddystone rocks were a sailor's nightmare, jagged teeth rising from the sea near Plymouth. Henry Winstanley, an architect and engineer, swore he would tame them. He built a lighthouse directly atop the rocks, a masterpiece of wood, glass, and defiance. When critics warned it wouldn't survive the next great storm, he replied proudly, "If there ever be a storm strong enough to destroy my work, may I be in it myself." In November 1703, Britain faced its deadliest tempest in recorded history, a hurricane so fierce it tore ships from harbors and leveled cities. Winstanley insisted on staying inside his lighthouse to witness it. When morning came, the structure was gone. So was he. Not a plank was ever found. He kept his promise, and the sea accepted it. Donald Crowhurst, the sailor who sailed into madness. In 1968, a British engineer named Donald Crowhurst entered a solo yacht race. A round-the-world challenge so dangerous that even veterans hesitated to join. He had no ocean experience. His boat, Teignmouth Electron, was barely seaworthy, but Crowhurst was obsessed with proving himself. To his investors, his family, his pride, he set sail from England with a smile and a lie. He told the press he would win. Weeks later, radio silence. Months passed. Then, suddenly, reports came. Crowhurst was performing brilliantly, breaking records. But it wasn't true. He had faked his coordinates, sending false logs to appear still in the race, while drifting aimlessly in the South Atlantic. When his boat was finally found, it was empty. His last journal entries dissolved into madness, mathematical equations, ramblings about God, infinity, and time. His final words, "It is finished, it is finished, it is the mercy." No trace of him was ever found. The sea had claimed the man who couldn't admit defeat. He tried to cheat the ocean. It didn't take it personally, it just took him. Jimmy Heselden, the billionaire killed by his own invention. He was a self-made millionaire from Leeds, a former miner who built his fortune designing blast walls for the military. In 2010, he bought the company that made Segways, the futuristic self-balancing scooters once hyped as the future of transport. One morning, Heselden took his Segway out for a ride near his estate. The path ran along a high cliff over the river wharf. Somehow, the machine veered off the trail and over the edge. Police found him at the bottom, still entangled in the device. The man who owned the company had been killed by the very product he was trying to promote. The press, always merciless, called it the most ironic accident in modern business history. He built walls to protect soldiers, but nothing protects us from irony. John Sedgwick, the general who doubted a bullet. It was May 1864, the Battle of Spotsylvania. Union General John Sedgwick was inspecting his men. As Confederate sharpshooters fired from afar, his soldiers ducked behind cover. He laughed. "They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance," he shouted, and seconds later, a bullet struck him just below the eye. He fell instantly, his words still echoing through the ranks. No elephant was harmed that day. His troops, stunned, never forgot the lesson. Arrogance has perfect aim. He mocked death. It corrected his math. Eugène François Vidocq, the criminal who created the police. He was a thief who became a detective, a con man turned crime fighter. Eugène Vidocq, the founder of modern criminology, an inspiration for both Sherlock Holmes and Jean Valjean. He invented forensic methods decades ahead of his time: record-keeping, ballistics, fingerprinting. He lived by logic and trusted no one, except science. In 1857, while experimenting with new disinfectants, Vidocq inhaled fumes he believed harmless. He coughed, waved off concern, and continued working. Within hours, he was dead from pulmonary failure. The first detective to solve everyone else's mystery had written his own, sealed in chemistry. He built the rules, then broke the last one. Modigliani, the artist who died beautifully, and so did she. Amedeo Modigliani painted eyes like smoke, souls trapped in color, too fragile to blink. He lived in a haze of absinthe, genius and poverty, driven by a fever that was both talent and illness. By 1920, tuberculosis was already devouring his lungs. He painted faster, drank harder, and whispered to friends, "I am not afraid. I am burning." He died in his Paris apartment, alone, except for his pregnant lover, Jeanne Hébuterne. The next morning, she climbed to the 5th floor, looked out over the same grey rooftops, and jumped. Their bodies were buried together, their daughter, orphaned, their names, immortal. Art critics call it the tragic union of love and decay. But Modigliani would have smiled. For him, beauty and death had always been the same pigment. He painted life until it blurred into afterlife. Jean-Baptiste Lully, the conductor killed by his own baton. It was 1687, and Versailles glittered under candlelight. Jean-Baptiste Lully, Louis XIV's favorite composer, was leading an orchestra during a royal concert. In those days, conductors didn't use batons. They used long staffs, pounding the floor in rhythm. Lully's foot was in the wrong place. The staff struck down, hard. The iron tip pierced his toe. He laughed, ignored it, and kept conducting. Days later, infection set in. Doctors begged to amputate. He refused. A dancer could not be seen without grace, a courtier without symmetry. Gangrene crept upward, turning his music into fevered hallucination. He died still humming his own requiem. He kept perfect time, until time kept him. Michel Lotito, the man who ate the impossible. They called him Monsieur Mange-Tout, Mr. Eat-All, a French performance artist with a stomach like steel. Over 2 decades, he consumed bicycles, shopping carts, televisions, and, most famously, a Cessna airplane. He dismantled it piece by piece, ate the metal in tiny fragments, washed down with mineral oil and water. Doctors confirmed it wasn't illusion. His stomach lining was twice as thick as normal. He finished the plane in 2 years, but the metal never left him. In 2007, after eating nearly 9 tons of objects, his organs gave up. He died not from poison, but from the absence of what had once filled him, the appetite for the absurd. The plane remains in the record books. He remains in disbelief. Some people chase dreams. He digested his. Sylvia Plath, the poet who spoke too clearly to the void. She wrote like someone translating pain into architecture. Every word, a mirror that cut both ways. By 1963, Sylvia Plath was a mother, a genius, and a storm-wearing human skin. That February, she sealed the kitchen of her London flat with wet towels, placed bread and milk outside her children's door, and turned on the gas oven. When neighbors found her, the room was still warm. Her final poem, Edge, lay on the table beside her. The woman is perfected. Her dead body wears the smile of accomplishment. Critics have argued for decades whether her death was art or escape, but in the quiet spaces between her lines, it's clear she knew some beauty kills the vessel it borrows. She didn't write about death, she edited it. Carl Scheele, the chemist who tasted his work. Carl Wilhelm Scheele gave the world oxygen, chlorine, and countless other discoveries. But he had one dangerous habit. He tasted everything. Every new compound. A sip, a lick, a sniff. If it didn't kill him immediately, he noted its flavor. Hydrogen fluoride, sharp; mercury nitrate, metallic; cyanide, faintly sweet. That last one killed him. He was found at his desk in 1786, slumped over his notes, pen still in hand, the air around him filled with the ghosts of his own experiments. He had identified more poisons than anyone alive, and became the final one. Curiosity didn't kill the cat, it killed the chemist. Gary Hoy, the lawyer who tested the law of gravity. Toronto, 1993. Gary Hoy was a corporate lawyer with a flair for theatrics. He liked to demonstrate to new interns that the windows of their skyscraper were unbreakable. He would run and throw himself against the glass and bounce off harmlessly. It always impressed the room. Until one day, it didn't. He charged, slammed the window, and indeed, the glass didn't break. But the frame popped loose. He fell 24 stories to his death. Engineers later confirmed the glass had performed perfectly. He died, proving his point. Literally. He didn't lose the argument. He just left the room. Paracelsus, the alchemist who measured death in drops. He was the Renaissance's wildest doctor, a healer who mocked tradition, defied universities, and carried his laboratory wherever he went. Paracelsus believed everything was poison, even air, even love, and that only the dose decided the difference. He called it the golden law of medicine. But obsession doesn't measure in moderation. By 1541, he was drinking mercury solutions to purify the blood, inhaling sulfur vapors to clear the mind, and swallowing tinctures that glowed faintly blue in the dark. He claimed it was working. It wasn't. His body gave out suddenly. Some said from mercury poisoning. Others whispered he had finally tested one drop too far. When they found his notebooks, the last page read, "There is poison in everything, and it begins in man." He gave the world toxicology and became its first exhibit. He didn't overdose. He proved his theory. Charles VI of France, the king who thought he was glass. He was called Charles the Mad. But madness, like glass, is rarely born. It's made. In 1392, the King of France suffered a fever so severe that when it broke, his reason shattered with it. He began to believe that his body was made entirely of glass. He refused to be touched. He sat motionless for hours, wrapped in quilts for fear of breaking. He banned sudden movements in his presence. He even had iron rods sewn into his clothing to support his structure. When courtiers bowed, they did so silently, terrified that a single sound might crack the king. Years passed. His mind dulled into a trembling stillness. He refused food, and finally, one winter night, simply stopped. He hadn't broken. He had melted into the legend of fragility itself. Power turned transparent and vanished. Alexander Bogdanov, the scientist who tried to transfuse immortality. He was a physician, philosopher, revolutionary, and a dreamer who believed that blood could transfer youth itself. In the 1920s, Alexander Bogdanov led secret experiments in Moscow, transfusing blood between young and old volunteers. He claimed miraculous results: clearer skin, sharper vision, restored energy. He saw it as the key to eternal life, a communist immortality shared equally by all. Then, in 1928, he performed one final transfusion on himself. The donor was a medical student, suffering from malaria and tuberculosis. Within hours, Bogdanov's body rebelled, his organs shut down, his fever raged, and he died in agony. He had given his life for an idea too noble to test. Soviet scientists later continued his work. Today, blood rejuvenation is still studied, half science, half heresy. He sought eternity in blood, and found it, just not the kind he meant. Sir Humphrey Davy, the chemist who laughed himself to death. Almost. Before the world knew anesthesia, Humphrey Davy knew nitrous oxide, laughing gas. In the early 1800s, he began experimenting, filling a silk bag with the gas and inhaling deeply. At first, it made him euphoric, visions, laughter, a feeling of cosmic joy. He began to host laughing sessions with poets and scientists, turning intoxication into philosophy. He declared, "Nothing exists but pleasure," and wrote hundreds of pages on its effects, before fainting mid-sentence. He survived dozens of overdoses, but his lungs never recovered. Years of self-experimentation left him weak and short of breath. He died young, of respiratory failure, still believing that laughter could conquer pain. In a way, it did. His discoveries led directly to modern anesthesia and to every surgery that saved a life without screaming. He inhaled truth and exhaled humanity's first mercy. Robert Falcon Scott, the explorer who froze with his diary. It was the winter of 1912 in the endless white of Antarctica. Robert Falcon Scott and his team had finally reached the South Pole, only to discover the Norwegian flag already planted there. Roald Amundsen had beaten them by 5 weeks. They turned back defeated, their food dwindling, their strength fading. Blizzards followed them like ghosts. One by one, the men fell, frostbitten, starving, too weak to stand. Scott's final entry reads, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course. For God's sake, look after our people." They found him months later, frozen in his tent, pen still clutched in hand. Beside him, photographs, letters, and a diary so perfectly preserved it still carried the scent of the Antarctic wind. He never made it home, but his words did, and that was enough to make him immortal. He failed to reach the world's end, so the world came to his. Amelia Earhart, the pilot who vanished into the sky. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, a symbol of courage in an age that still doubted women's wings. In 1937, she set out to circle the globe with her navigator, Fred Noonan. Her final flight, from Lae, New Guinea toward Howland Island, a tiny speck in the Pacific. Radio contact faded. Her voice came through one last time. "We are running north and south." Then static. Silence. The search covered thousands of miles. No wreckage, no survivors, no trace. Theories bloomed like mirages, captured by the Japanese, crashed into the sea, or lived out her life under another name. The truth is quieter. The ocean simply kept her. Even now, aircraft still scan those waters, hoping to find the ghost of her ambition. She didn't disappear. She ascended. John Franklin, the man who ate his own voyage. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set sail from England with 2 ships and 129 men to chart the last unknown passage through the Arctic. The expedition vanished. Years later, search parties found fragments, a spoon, a Bible, and frozen bodies scattered across the tundra. Autopsies revealed the truth: lead poisoning from their tinned food, scurvy, starvation, and something darker: evidence of cannibalism. The explorers had eaten one another, driven mad by hunger and isolation. Franklin's bones were never found, but Inuit oral history tells of a ghostly ship drifting silently through the ice for years afterward, its lamps still burning. He set out to conquer the Arctic. Instead, it digested him. Some discoveries are meant to stay frozen. Jean-François de la Pérouse, the navigator who sailed off the map. He was France's greatest navigator, sent by King Louis XVI to explore the Pacific, to bring back maps, data, and glory. In 1785, La Pérouse left Europe with 2 ships, brimming with scientists and hope. For 3 years, he sent back brilliant reports from Alaska, Japan, Australia. Then, silence. No word, no wreck, no return. Even the king, days before his own execution, asked from his cell, "Has anyone heard from La Pérouse?" It took 40 years to find the answer. His ships were discovered off the island of Vanikoro, shattered on coral, cannons scattered in the sand. They had wrecked in a storm, survivors building shelters, then disappearing into the jungle. No one ever came home. The last note in his journal read, "All is well." It was, for exactly 1 page more. The map ended. He followed. Harry Houdini, the escape artist who couldn't escape himself. He made the impossible look effortless. Chains, handcuffs, underwater coffins, even a sealed milk can filled with water. Harry Houdini was more than a magician. He was proof that willpower could defy nature itself. But in October 1926, during a tour in Montreal, a university student approached him backstage, asking if it was true that Houdini could withstand any punch to the abdomen. Before Houdini could prepare, the student struck him hard, twice. Houdini smiled, thought he always smiled, but within hours he collapsed from pain. A ruptured appendix, peritonitis, followed. He kept performing until he couldn't stand, collapsing during his final show. He died days later, reportedly whispering the code word he'd promised his wife, a secret phrase they agreed upon, in case he ever returned from beyond. She waited 10 years. He never did. His last great illusion wasn't an escape, it was permanence. He defied death for a living. Death waited patiently for the encore. Tommy Cooper, the comedian who collapsed into his joke. April 15th, 1984. Live television. Millions watching. Tommy Cooper, a British comic known for chaotic magic tricks and a signature fez, was in the middle of a routine on Live from Her Majesty's Theatre. He raised his arms for a gag and suddenly froze, then fell backward. The audience roared with laughter. They thought it was part of the act. The camera lingered. Crew members rushed out from behind the curtain, still in frame, trying not to break the illusion. It wasn't an act. He had suffered a massive heart attack on air. For several minutes, the audience kept laughing until someone realized the joke had stopped laughing back. His final performance was the purest expression of his art, making people happy even as he died. He got the biggest laugh of his life and didn't have to hear it end. Chongling Su, the magician who forgot his trick. He wasn't Chinese. He was an American named William Ellsworth Robinson, who built his career pretending to be an exotic magician from the East. His act, The Marvelous Chinese Conjurer, drew huge crowds in London. His most famous illusion was the bullet catch. He would have assistants fire loaded guns at him, then catch the bullets in his teeth. On March 23, 1918, the trick went wrong. A gun misfired, sending a real bullet into his chest. He staggered, and for the first time in decades, spoke English on stage. "Oh my God, something's happened." He died minutes later. The newspapers called it the most tragic applause in theater history. The irony, he had built his career on illusion and died the moment he dropped it. He lived by deception and met truth the hard way. Molière, the playwright who died playing death itself. Paris, 1673. Candlelight, powdered wigs, and the great Molière performing in his new play, The Imaginary Invalid, a comedy about a hypochondriac obsessed with illness. Midway through, he began to cough violently, his face pale beneath the makeup. The audience roared. They thought it was part of the act. He finished his lines, bowed, and collapsed backstage. Blood filled his throat. By midnight, he was dead, still wearing his yellow costume, the color that actors whispered was cursed. His final act was a parody of mortality, and death, gracious as ever, waited for the cue. He mocked death. Death applauded. Jim Fixx, the man who ran from death until it caught up. In the 1970s, Jim Fixx became the face of America's running boom. He'd once been overweight, stressed, and a heavy smoker, until one day he decided to change everything. He started running, then writing. His book, The Complete Book of Running, became a bestseller, inspiring millions to lace up their shoes and chase health, endurance, and longevity. He preached that exercise could defeat death. On July 20th, 1984, Fixx went for his daily jog through the Vermont woods. He never came back. A passing motorist found him lying by the roadside, dead from a massive heart attack. His arteries were nearly blocked. Genetics, stress, and irony had joined forces. The man who told the world how to outpace mortality had simply run out of road. But maybe he was right in a way. He didn't die running from death. He died doing life. He finished the race. The course just didn't have a return path. François Sévère, the driver who touched the edge. Too long. He was elegance in motion, a French Formula One prodigy with the beauty of a movie star and the precision of a machine. By 1973, Sévère was the rising hope of the racing world, mentored by Jackie Stewart, destined to be champion. But racing isn't about destiny. It's about fractions of a second, measured in heartbeats and tire smoke. During the Watkins Glen Grand Prix, Sévère took a corner too wide. His car clipped a curb, flipped violently, and split in half against a steel barrier. He was killed instantly. Stewart, his mentor, retired immediately after. He couldn't watch another lap of life turn into wreckage. Sévère's seat was empty the next season, a monument to perfection's price. He didn't crash, he arrived, at the speed of silence. Dale Earnhardt, the legend who refused to break. Daytona, 2001. The air smelled like fuel and glory. Dale Earnhardt Sr., the Intimidator, wasn't just a NASCAR driver, he was an American myth on wheels. On the final lap of the Daytona 500, his son Dale Jr. was racing ahead, fighting for victory. Earnhardt was behind him, blocking, defending, making sure his boy would win. Then came the wall. At 180 miles per hour, his car clipped another and hit head-on. To the crowd, it looked minor, a routine crash. He didn't get out. The paramedics found him with a fractured skull. He had died protecting the position, protecting his legacy. His son crossed the finish line moments later, raising his hands, not yet knowing what had been traded for triumph. He never slowed down, and that's why they still call it racing. Ayrton Senna, the driver who drove into immortality. Imola, Italy. May 1st, 1994. The San Marino Grand Prix. A weekend already cursed. One driver dead, another injured. Yet Ayrton Senna, the Brazilian god of Formula One, insisted on racing. He prayed in the garage before getting into the car. Today, he whispered, I feel I could reach the limit. On the 7th lap, his car left the track at 135 miles per hour and slammed into a concrete barrier. The steering column had failed. A piece of suspension pierced his helmet. He died before he could finish the turn. In his cockpit, marshals found an Austrian flag. He had planned to wave it in honor of Roland Ratzenberger, the driver who had died the day before. He never got to raise it. The flag was raised for him instead. He didn't lose control. He crossed over. Louis Slotin, the man who touched the demon core. Los Alamos, 1946. A small silvery sphere of plutonium sat on a table. Scientists called it the demon core, a lump of matter so unstable that even a mistake could trigger a chain reaction. Physicist Louis Slotin was demonstrating how to measure critical mass. He used a screwdriver to separate two half-spheres of beryllium, just enough to prevent the core from going supercritical. The screwdriver slipped. In a fraction of a second, a blue flash filled the room. Everyone felt heat, not on their skin, but inside their bones. Slotin reacted instantly, knocking the halves apart, saving his colleagues' lives. He absorbed the entire radiation burst. 9 days later, his body began to disintegrate from within. He described it calmly, as if taking notes for the next experiment. They said the room still glowed faintly after he was gone. He held a star in his hands, and it held him back. Harry Daghlian, the first man to die for the atom. Before Slotin, there was Daghlian. Los Alamos, 1945, the same demon core. He was alone in the lab that night, placing tungsten bricks around the plutonium sphere to measure neutron reflection. His hand slipped, and a brick fell directly onto the core. Instantly, the air turned blue. He reached into the light, trying to dismantle the setup, but it was already too late. The radiation dose he received was fatal. Over the next 25 days, his skin burned from the inside out. He apologized to his colleagues from his hospital bed, still worrying about their data. He became the first person in history to die from a criticality accident. The demon core claimed him and waited less than a year for its second victim. He made the atom speak, and it whispered his name. Andrei Zheleznyakov, the scientist who breathed the secret gas. He was a chemical weapons researcher in the Soviet Union, working on a nerve agent so secret that even its name was classified, Novichok. In 1987, during a lab test, a ventilation failure caused a small leak. Zheleznyakov inhaled an invisible mist, just a few molecules. He staggered, convulsed, and was rushed to the hospital. He survived, but survived was a cruel word for what followed. His health collapsed. He suffered hallucinations, chronic pain, seizures, and irreversible nerve damage. He lived for 6 years, long enough to become the first and only man to publicly confirm the existence of the Novichok program. Then, quietly, he disappeared from every record. The gas he created outlasted him. Deadly, odorless, perfect. He wanted to invent silence, and succeeded. Empedocles, the philosopher who tried to become a god. Ancient Greece, 5th century BCE. Empedocles was no ordinary philosopher. He called himself a prophet, a healer, and sometimes a god. He taught that all matter came from 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and that humans could reunite with the divine by understanding those forces. He performed miracles, healed the sick, and once claimed he could control the wind. People began to believe him. He began to believe them back. One night, he climbed Mount Etna, the great volcano of Sicily, and leapt into its crater, believing he would be reborn as immortal flame. The volcano roared its approval. Days later, a single bronze sandal was spat out among the lava rocks. Empedocles had indeed become legend, just not in the way he expected. He wanted to be divine. He achieved it through combustion. Diogenes the Cynic, the philosopher who lived too honestly. He rejected everything: money, luxury, manners, even walls. Diogenes lived in a barrel on the streets of Athens, eating scraps, sleeping with stray dogs, and preaching that happiness required nothing but freedom. When Alexander the Great came to visit him, the emperor asked, "What can I do for you?" Diogenes replied, "Step out of my sunlight." Legend says he died the way he lived, on his own terms. Some say from eating raw octopus. Others say from infection after being bitten by one of his beloved dogs. A few claim he simply held his breath and decided not to breathe anymore. Whichever version is true, his death felt less like an ending and more like a refusal to participate. He had mocked kings, scholars, and gods. In the end, he mocked life itself. He escaped society, then escaped existence. Gilles Deleuze, the philosopher who walked out the window. Paris, 1995. Gilles Deleuze was one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, a man obsessed with freedom, with escaping the molar structures of control. For years, he had been dying slowly, his lungs destroyed by disease, his body dependent on machines to breathe. His philosophy taught that life was a line of flight, a constant escape from confinement. So one afternoon, he did exactly that. He opened the window of his apartment and stepped through it. He didn't fall. He exited. Students still debate whether his death was suicide or the final act of his own theory. Either way, he had found his purest line of flight. He stopped breathing, not from weakness, but from consistency. Arthur Koestler, the writer who couldn't outthink pain. He had survived fascism, prison, and war. He wrote about the darkness in human systems and the even deeper darkness inside the human mind. But Arthur Koestler had another enemy, leukemia, slow and merciless. In 1983, at age 77, he decided the rational choice was to end his suffering on his own terms. He wrote a calm farewell note, "I am leaving because I am bored with life." His wife Cynthia chose to die with him. They drank a mixture of barbiturates, holding hands until their pulses stopped. Even in death, critics argued over him. Was it courage, arrogance, surrender? He had spent his life seeking meaning. In the end, he made his own. He didn't lose hope. He finished his argument. King Edward II, the monarch who learned pain the hard way. He was a king who preferred company over command, pleasure over politics, and favourites over duty. His affection for his companion, Piers Gaveston, scandalised England. His barons rebelled. His wife, Queen Isabella, betrayed him. He was captured, imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, and quietly removed from history. The rumour that survived was anything but quiet, that he was executed with a red-hot poker inserted in a place no crown could protect, so that no visible wound would betray the deed. Historians debate the truth, but the story endured because it fit the man, a punishment as humiliating as his reign. If cruelty is the currency of power, then his assassins were rich indeed. He wanted passion. He got it. Concentrated. Pope Adrian IV, the Pope who choked on a fly. He was the only Englishman ever to sit on the papal throne, a brilliant negotiator, a skilled politician, and a man who believed even chaos could be blessed. In 1159, while dining in Rome, he was struck by a coughing fit mid-meal. Witnesses say a fly had flown into his throat, a small, absurd interruption. Moments later, he was dead. The Vatican chroniclers struggled with the story. How could the most powerful man in Christendom be undone by a creature no larger than a prayer bead? But the irony was divine. A pope who had silenced emperors, outmaneuvered kings, and survived assassins, defeated by the humblest of God's creations. It wasn't blasphemy, it was symmetry. He spoke for heaven. He was answered with wings. Jessie Smither, Jane Stafford, the chemist who became her experiment. In the early 20th century, scientists believed radium was a miracle, a glowing symbol of progress. They put it in toothpaste, cosmetics, even chocolate. Jessie Smither, a chemist and socialite, was fascinated by the luminous allure of liquid light. She began experimenting with radium-infused skin creams, claiming they rejuvenated her complexion. Her cheeks did glow, at first beautifully, then eerily. The radiance turned to burns. Her jaw began to ache, then decay. Doctors called it radium necrosis. By the time she died, her bones emitted a faint blue light in the dark. Her vanity had achieved immortality, and her skeleton became a teaching specimen for the dangers of radiation exposure. They say the glow lingered for years after. She wanted beauty that never faded. She got it. The Radium Girls. The Shining Dead. They were factory workers in the 1920s, painting watch dials with luminous radium paint. They were told it was harmless, even healthy. Lip dip paint. went the mantra. To sharpen their brushes, they'd lick the tips. Their lips sparkled in the dark like fairy dust. Some used the paint as nail polish or lipstick. Then came the pain, toothaches, jaw rot, tumors, anemia. Their bones became radioactive. Some glowed faintly through their skin. The companies denied responsibility, but the women fought and won one of the first landmark cases for worker safety in America. Their bodies still emit measurable radiation today. Cemeteries call them the shining ghosts. They painted time and became its markers. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, claimed by the sea he worshipped. He was one of the brightest lights of romantic poetry. Friend of Byron, husband to Mary Shelley, author of Ozymandias, dreamer of impossible freedoms. In 1822, Shelley set sail on his small schooner, the Don Juan, off the Italian coast near Livorno. A sudden storm rose, black, furious, unrelenting. His crew begged him to turn back. He smiled and said, "The sea is our mother. She will not harm her children." 10 days later, his body washed ashore, his face unrecognizable, his pockets filled with Keats' poems. They burned his body on the beach. As his heart refused to burn, Mary kept it, a relic of a man who mistook beauty for mercy. He wrote of eternity, and the sea signed his last stanza. Jean-François Pilat de Rosier, the first to fall from the sky. He was one of the world's first aeronauts, a pioneer of balloon flight, a man who saw the heavens not as metaphor, but destination. In 1785, he attempted the first aerial crossing of the English Channel, using a hybrid balloon, hydrogen for lift, hot air for control. Everyone warned him. Hydrogen is volatile. He smiled. Science, he said, demanded courage. Halfway across, the hydrogen ignited. Witnesses saw a fiery sphere fall from the clouds. Rosier and his companion crashed near Boulogne, the first human beings ever to die in an air crash. He had written in his journal, "To fly is to taste immortality." He did, and paid full price. He reached the sky. The sky reached back. Modest Mussorgsky, the composer who died with his music unfinished. Russia, 1881. Mussorgsky was a genius and a drunk. He wrote pictures at an exhibition, a suite that turned paintings into sound, color into emotion. But fame never brought peace. He spent his last years in poverty, his health destroyed by vodka and insomnia. One morning he awoke, shaved, put on a borrowed uniform, and painted a self-portrait. In it, his eyes are glassy but defiant, as if he could already see what came next. He died a week later, on his 42nd birthday. His masterpiece unfinished. His portrait still wet. It hangs today in the Tretyakov Gallery, a requiem in oil and silence. He painted the sound of his own ending. Victor Barrio, the matador who met the bull's revenge, Spain, 2016. In a modern world where bullfighting was already fading, Victor Barrio called himself a traditionalist, a dancer with death. That day, in Teruel, he faced Lorenzo, a 529-kilogram bull. The crowd roared as his sword struck, but missed the heart. Lorenzo charged. His horn pierced Barrio's chest, straight through the lung. He died in the ring, in front of a live television audience. The bull was killed minutes later. His mother, by custom, was slaughtered too, to end the bloodline of vengeance. But some said the curse had already passed on, not to animals, but to tradition itself. He danced with death, and death led. Kazimir Malevich, the painter who vanished into his own square. Moscow, 1935. Kazimir Malevich, founder of suprematism, creator of Black Square, the painting that erased the world to start over. He believed art must transcend reality, to depict pure feeling, beyond time, beyond objects. When he fell ill with cancer, he refused morphine, saying pain was part of form. He died in his studio beneath his final painting, a white cross on a black background. His coffin was painted with the same symbols. When they buried him, they placed his body under a giant black square, cut into the earth. He became part of his geometry, the man who literally disappeared into abstraction. He painted infinity, then entered it. Franz Dibbel, the alchemist who melted himself, 17th century Germany. Franz Dibbel called himself an alchemist of the divine. He believed he could transmute not just metals, but flesh, purifying it into the substance of angels. He locked himself in his workshop for days, brewing quicksilver, arsenic, and gold leaf in a crucible. Neighbors said the fumes turned the night air blue. When the door was finally broken down, they found only his robe and a puddle of molten residue that hissed and bubbled. Some said he'd been vaporized by his own elixir. Others whispered he'd succeeded, that he had turned himself into light. His notes ended mid-sentence. I am beginning to feel the change. He promised transfiguration. He delivered disappearance. Jack Daniel, the man killed by his own temper. Lynchburg, Tennessee. Jack Daniel, founder of the whiskey that bears his name, was known for two things: his iron discipline and his fiery impatience. One morning, arriving early to the distillery, he couldn't open his safe. Frustrated, he kicked it, hard. The blow injured his toe. The wound got infected. Gangrene spread. He died from complications weeks later. The man who built an empire of alcohol was undone by one sober moment of rage. They say his last words were bitter irony. One impulsive act, and I couldn't even drink about it. He distilled patience for a living and ran out of it. Michael Jackson, the king who couldn't sleep. He was more than a pop star. He was a phenomenon. Michael Jackson redefined music, movement, fame itself. But fame has a cost, and his was measured in sleepless nights. By the late 2000s, his life was a fortress of security, secrets, and sedation. Every night, he begged for rest. Every night, his doctor, Conrad Murray, administered propofol, a surgical anesthetic not meant for bedrooms. Jackson called it his milk. It was the only thing that worked. On June 25, 2009, he lay in his rented mansion in Los Angeles, preparing for a comeback tour that promised redemption. He never woke up. His death was ruled a homicide. An overdose, yes, but also an overdose of expectation, of pressure, of trying to be more than human for too long. Millions mourned, but even in death, he couldn't rest. Conspiracies bloomed, tributes flooded in, and the world still dances to the echo of his moonwalk. He wanted to make the world move, and it still does, just without him. He mastered rhythm, but sleep had the final beat. Princess Diana, the Queen of Hearts in the Tunnel of Light, August 31st, 1997. Paris, a city built for love. That night built a shrine to loss. Princess Diana, hounded, photographed, adored, was fleeing paparazzi through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel with her companion, Dodi Fayed. The car struck a pillar at over 100 miles an hour. No seatbelt, no chance. In the chaos that followed, the world split into before and after. The People's Princess was gone. She had spent her life escaping palaces and died escaping cameras. The same lenses that once crowned her became her hunters. At her funeral, 2.5 billion people watched. Elton John sang. Her sons walked behind the casket. And for a moment, a world obsessed with power remembered tenderness. Diana's story ended not in scandal, but in sacrifice. The price of empathy in a world that consumes it. She lived in flashes. She died in one. Heath Ledger, the Joker who forgot to exit character. He was only 28, but Heath Ledger had already turned acting into alchemy. In The Dark Knight, he created a Joker that felt almost supernatural. Chaos incarnate, intelligence unhinged, a character that stared back at its actor. Ledger isolated himself during filming, sleep-deprived, restless, filling notebooks with the Joker's thoughts and philosophies. After production wrapped, he couldn't turn it off. The insomnia stayed. The mind raced. He used prescription medications to slow it down. Too many, in the wrong combination. On January 22, 2008, he was found dead in his New York apartment. An accidental overdose, but maybe not entirely an accident. He had gone too far into the labyrinth of performance, where identity dissolves into art. When he posthumously won the Oscar, his family accepted it in silence. No one applauded long enough to fill the emptiness. He became the role, and the role never let go. Whitney Houston, the voice that drowned in silence. She was the voice of heaven, a cathedral built of sound. Whitney Houston didn't just sing. She soared, but fame is a high that no note can sustain forever. Drugs, heartbreak, and public humiliation had hollowed out the brilliance that once seemed untouchable. February 11th, 2012. A hotel bathtub in Beverly Hills. The night before the Grammys. The music world's brightest star, alone, surrounded by her own reflection. The coroner's report said accidental drowning, a cocktail of cocaine and sedatives in her system. But the real cause was slower, quieter, years of exhaustion, and the weight of a spotlight that burned too hot. The world called it tragedy. But for Whitney, it might have been peace. Her voice still plays at weddings, in churches, in every moment people try to remember beauty. She sang of love eternal and slipped beneath its surface. Robin Williams, the clown who couldn't find his own laughter. He made the world laugh, so much that no one noticed when he stopped. Robin Williams was lightning in human form, a man whose voice could shift from comedy to compassion in a heartbeat. His movies taught entire generations to be kind, to imagine, to keep going. But offstage, he battled storms, depression, addiction, and finally, a rare degenerative disease that attacked his mind, Lewy body dementia. In 2014, he took his own life at home. The shock was global. the grief intimate. The man who healed sadness in others had been quietly losing his own reflection. After his death, doctors confirmed his brain had been riddled with the disease. It wasn't despair that killed him, it was confusion, the terror of watching his brilliance flicker. He had once said, "I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy." He was right. He gave the world joy and left before it ran out. Kurt Cobain, the voice that refused to fade. Grunge wasn't just music, it was a cry, and Kurt Cobain was its echo. With Nirvana, he turned alienation into an anthem. But fame, that impossible beast, devoured the boy from Aberdeen, who only wanted to play guitar. He hated attention, yet it never stopped following him. Drugs numbed the noise, but not the ache. On April 5, 1994, he wrote his final note, half love letter, half apology. He quoted Neil Young, "It's better to burn out than to fade away." Then he pulled the trigger. The world froze. Teenagers wept. A generation lost its voice and gained a ghost. Even now, his image remains young, eternal, painful, a God who never wanted worship. He sang about escape and found it. James Dean, the rebel who never aged, 1955. He was Hollywood's golden boy, a new kind of star, raw, restless, painfully real. James Dean embodied rebellion before it had a name. He loved speed as much as he loved the camera. Cars gave him a sense of control that life never did. On September 30th, he was driving his Porsche Spider, nicknamed Little Bastard, to a race in Salinas. A Ford turned left across his lane. The crash was instant. His last words to a friend, "That guy's got to stop. He'll see us." He was 24. His death froze him in myth. Forever young, forever defiant. The studio released Rebel Without a Cause weeks later. Audiences watched, unaware he was already gone. He didn't live long enough to fade. He became the portrait of every what if. He drove into legend and left the rest of us behind. Freddie Mercury, the voice that defied silence. He was thunder wrapped in silk. Freddie Mercury didn't just sing, he conquered sound. With Queen, he transformed stadiums into sanctuaries, turning every audience into a choir. But even gods bleed. By the late 1980s, he was fighting AIDS in secrecy. He kept performing, recording, until his voice cracked blood. Because music was the only part of him the disease couldn't touch. In 1991, a day after publicly admitting his diagnosis, he died peacefully at home, surrounded by those who loved him. At his funeral, his ashes were scattered in secret. The man who had belonged to the entire world took one final thing just for himself: privacy. His last words to his bandmate reportedly were, "I still have music to make." And he did, even in silence. He burned with sound and left light behind. Chadwick Boseman, the king who fought in silence. He played kings, heroes, icons, but never himself. Chadwick Boseman carried the weight of representation, of entire generations seeing themselves, finally, in a hero. While he filmed Black Panther, Marshall, Da 5 Bloods, he was fighting a far crueler enemy. Stage 3, colon cancer. He told no one, not his castmates, not the world. Between chemotherapy sessions, he trained, acted, smiled, his body breaking while his characters stood unbreakable. In 2020, he died at home, surrounded by family, leaving behind the words, "Take your place among the ancestors and watch over us." He became what he played, a myth, a symbol, a quiet kind of forever. At the next Oscars, his chair was left empty, but the air itself felt heavier, like a kingdom holding its breath. He taught the world strength, then showed us grace. Amy Winehouse, the voice that couldn't save itself. She sang like she'd lived 1,000 years in 27. Her voice, smoke, soul, and heartbreak made sound. Amy Winehouse wrote truth with no filter, and the world devoured it. But fame doesn't love back. Every relapse, every stumble became a headline, a punchline, a photo op. Her friends begged her to stop drinking. She smiled, shrugged, and said, "No, no, no." On July 23, 2011, she was found dead in her London flat. Alcohol poisoning. Her blood alcohol level, fatal. Her loneliness, immeasurable. Her last recording was a duet called Body and Soul, and that's exactly what she gave. Both. The 27 Club had another member, and silence gained its most haunting voice. She sang about self-destruction and kept time perfectly. Anthony Bourdain, the explorer who ran out of map. He ate with kings and fishermen, sat in war zones and night markets, and found the sacred in every meal. Anthony Bourdain turned food into anthropology and travel into truth. But behind his curiosity was exhaustion. A man who could show the world everything except the inside of his own head. In 2018, filming in France, he didn't show up for breakfast. He had taken his own life in his hotel room. His friends said he'd looked tired but not broken. He'd just stopped. His death shattered millions because he had seemed like the man who understood everything. But maybe that was the problem. Understanding too much can hollow you out. He connected the world, then disconnected himself. Anthony Bourdain, the explorer who ran out of map. He ate with kings and fishermen, sat in war zones and night markets, and found the sacred in every meal. Anthony Bourdain turned food into anthropology and travel into truth. But behind his curiosity was exhaustion. A man who could show the world everything except the inside of his own head. In 2018, filming in France, he didn't show up for breakfast. He had taken his own life in his hotel room. His friends said he'd looked tired but not broken. He'd just stopped. His death shattered millions because he had seemed like the man who understood everything. But maybe that was the problem. Understanding too much can hollow you out. He connected the world, then disconnected himself. Paul Walker, the star who drove into the horizon. He made speed look poetic. Paul Walker wasn't just the face of Fast and Furious, he embodied it. Brotherhood, adrenaline, the road without end. Off-screen, he was quieter, a father, philanthropist, surfer. He loved cars, not as toys, but as a kind of meditation. On November 30th, 2013, he was riding in a Porsche Carrera GT after a charity event for typhoon victims. The car hit a light pole, burst into flames. Both men died instantly. The wreck was unrecognizable, metal twisted into a shape that looked almost cinematic. In Furious 7, his last appearance, they let him drive into the sunset, away from the franchise, away from Earth. The final shot was perfect, two roads splitting and a smile that didn't know it was goodbye. He lived fast, but left gently.